Welcome to the Agatha Christie in Devon podcast. I'm Matt Newbury.
And I'm Sophie Pearce. And this podcast is all about the places in Devon that Agatha loved and which inspired her. And today we are on beautiful Dartmoor, and I have to say the weather's not really behaving. It's a little bit windy and a little bit wet, but that's all part of Dartmoor's magic. And this is a place that Agatha loved and visited regularly throughout her life. And we've come to the Moorland Hotel. Now, why is this significant, Matt?
So in the last episode, we discussed how Agatha, after a challenge from her sister Madge, was trying to write her first novel. And she was writing it in the dispensary in Torquay, but like with many writers, writer's block came along and she couldn't finish the book. And her mum went, well, why don't you go up to Dartmoor? So the war was still on at the time, which is a bit strange. So she travelled up here to the Moorland Hotel, which she described as a large and dreary place, which I don't think you would describe it as today, would you?
No, it's obviously not a very hospitable day, but inside the hotel is very warm and inviting, with lots of big communal spaces and lots of pictures of Agatha Christie and memorabilia as well. And in fact, there's one of Agatha's novels in every bedroom, which is rather lovely. So Matt's been speaking to Dr. Jamie Bernthal Hooker about why Dartmoor was an inspiration.
It's really a perfect place for writers, I think. This was her first book, The Mysterious Ferret Styles. She couldn't finish it, really. She was having headaches, struggling to work out how to do it. So, yeah, she booked that 2-week stay on the moors. And it's like another world, but kind of on the doorstep. She was based in Devon. It was quite close by. But you just have access to that primal countryside, that vastness, that communion with something ancient, I guess. I think there's something really interesting about it being completely not the world she was writing about. So she was writing about a nice country house in the English countryside. She often did that. Like, she wrote Lord Edgware Dies, which is set in London. She wrote that in Syria. She wrote Death on the Nile, I think, largely from London. So she's writing about a place that she isn't currently. There's something about that escapism going on there, I think. But yeah, it's really an atmospheric place, I think.
So she stayed at the Moorland Hotel, which isn't that far from where Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yeah, I think he stayed in Princeton, which features actually in both their writing quite a bit. They had very, very different approaches, though. Arthur Conan Doyle, he deliberately set The Hound of the Baskervilles on Dartmoor. He tapped into local legends and folk tales about giant dogs, which a lot of places have. And he would go and walk the moors with a friend and take very careful notes and get back and write in careful detail about what he'd seen, which wasn't so much the case with Agatha. She was getting the vibes there and writing from there.
So he was a big influence on Agatha, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. Arthur Conan Doyle was a huge influence on most crime writers, I think. She grew up reading him, like many of us did, and many of us would go on to grow up reading her. When she was creating Poirot, she kind of based him in a way on Sherlock Holmes, but as an anti-Sherlock Holmes. She said in her autobiography, he was the one and only. I could never emulate him. And then talks about making Poirot all the things that Holmes isn't. But then she gives him that rather grand name, is how she puts it, the name Hercule. She says it's one of those names that Sherlock Holmes and his family had. It's Sherlock Mycroft. It's like Hercule Poirot, very, very grand. And she would go on to be writing in what she called the Sherlock Holmes tradition. And I would kind of dispute that. I'd say she moved the genre on a bit from that, but she did have Poirot, Hastings, who's like Dr. Watson, and then Inspector Japp, who's like Inspector Lestrade of the Yard. But there's a really big difference, I think, and that's that the Sherlock Holmes stories, we're admiring how clever the detective is. And Poirot doesn't need us to admire him because he's admiring himself. In those stories, we're trying to solve the mystery. In a way, with Holmes, we can watch him draw out conclusions and see how he does it. But with Poirot, it's like a game. It's like a race. We're trying to get to the answer before he can. And we never do, but we have all the same clues that he does.
So her writing process while staying at the hotel was quite interesting, wasn't it?
Oh, it was amazing. I wish my boss would prescribe this sort of thing when I have a tough time at work or get stuck on a problem. as I understand it, she would spend the morning writing, and then in the afternoon, she'd go and walk on the moors alone for a couple of hours, and she'd run over the dialogue in her head. Then she'd go home, have an enormous dinner, I think is how she puts it, and she'd go to sleep for 12 hours. Then she'd wake up completely energized to write. I don't think that further into her career, she had much scope to be doing that. She had to write quite a lot more. But that sort of routine clearly helped her write her first masterpiece.
So, although her first book was written on Dartmoor, as you said, it wasn't set there, but she did set other stories on the moors, didn't she?
Agatha Christie went back to Dartmoor again and again, well, in real life, but also in her work. She wrote a poem actually called Dartmoor. I'm not sure when she wrote it, possibly around this time. And she calls it the quiet country where the hills are purple in the evenings and the tors are grey and quiet. But then going beyond atmosphere, she used it, like she used so many settings, as a place to have a murder. She used the location to her advantage. So most famously, I'd say the Sitterford mystery is set on Dartmoor. It wasn't written there, but she knew the area. And I think at that point, her brother was living on Dartmoor. It makes use of the area. There's a fictional village there, and we actually get accounts of the moors and the tors and all the different places. And of course, the prison, which is the perfect setting for looming menace. Like with The Hound of the Baskervilles, there's an escaped prisoner on the run, which provides a kind of dramatic backdrop to a lot of what's going on. And of course, the suspects are cut off from a lot of the rest of the world. In this case, with the additional element of snow stopping anyone traveling around the moors. It starts actually with a seance, which is really interesting. That's how people get across Dartmoor, because they were told to by a Ouija board. So already we're going into that slightly supernatural-ish area, that place where normal logic doesn't necessarily apply. It's just really fascinating use of the area.
Thank you, Jamie. Well, we've come out of the hotel now and we're standing at the base of Hay Tor, but in typical Dartmoor fashion, the mists have descended and we can't see the Tor at all, but of course it all lends to the atmosphere, doesn't it?
Well, it feels like you're in the middle of the Hound of the Baskervilles out here at the moment, doesn't it? And this is the very bits of moor that Agatha walked and practiced her dialogue for that first novel. And she also came up here throughout her life, and she took Max Mallowan here one day in her Morris Cowley, and they drove up from Torquay, and the weather wasn't very good in Torquay, but in Agatha's head, the weather was going to be brilliant on the moors, and they got up here, and it was just got worse and worse and worse. But it can't put Max off, because he proposed to her the next day. And it's just a beautiful spot around here. The River Lemon starts here, and there's a whole theory that Poirot's secretary, Miss Lemon, took the name from the River Lemon that starts here.
It could well be. So, Matt, you've been speaking to a tour guide called Alex Graham from Unique Devon Tours. Now, he offers both Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle itineraries, and in fact, one of his tours helped him find love.
I had a guest, a young lady, come from Peru with her sister and sister's boyfriend back in 2017. And they came on my Agatha Christie tour. And then this young lady came on the tour again in 2021. And then last summer, 2023, we established that we actually both really liked each other. And we became a couple, and yes, a year or so later we're very much in love, and it's rather fabulous. It's a long distance relationship, but luckily she lives in Italy some of the year as well. So the upside is that when I'm not doing guided tours, I'm travelling to wonderful exotic places of the world, and together we love everything Agatha Christie. So she is a huge fan of Poirot, and we were lucky enough in March to go and see Sir David Suchet talk in Cardiff, and we met him afterwards. My girlfriend was rendered fairly speechless because she was so overwhelmed when we finally met him, but we got a photograph with him, and he was a true gentleman. We're lining up our second Agatha Christie festival this September, where we're going to many events, and very excited about it. So yeah, we're really living the dream.
So tell me about what makes Dartmoor so special.
It's a multi-layered place. It's a national park of 368 square miles in size. and it's got many, many layers of history, from Bronze Age history, medieval history, through to tin mining history. There are wild ponies, so every time I go up to Dartmoor with guests over the last 11 years, we always see the ponies, we see sheep, we see cows. It's beautiful, a beautiful, beautiful landscape. It's got rugged, rocky outcrops called tors. It's got river valleys, including the River Dart, which starts on Dartmoor and obviously flows past Greenway, Agatha's holiday home. It's a place of many, many stories. So as a tour guide, you're a storyteller, and Dartmoor aligns perfectly with that because there are so many myths and legends that I can recount to my guests when we're travelling around. But I see guests transformed when they get to Dartmoor. It's something the like of which they've never seen before, and they really do lose themselves in it.
And talking about luck, haven't you got quite a unique Conan Doyle family connection?
Very lucky indeed, really, yes. So when Conan Doyle was starting to sow the seed for The Hound of the Baskervilles, he needed to come down to Dartmoor to visit, and he needed someone with good local knowledge of Dartmoor. So he consulted with a man called the Reverend Robert Dewins Cook, who was a local vicar and also an expert on Dartmoor. And driven by no less Henry Baskerville, a humble coachman who was a coachman that lived around here. He drove Conan Doyle up onto Dartmoor, but he also took Reverend Robert Dewins Cook ahead of time to plan the locations, and he happens to be my great-grandfather. So it's a very, very nice family connection to have. We have a first edition of The Hound of the Baskervilles, and it really adds a nice level of authenticity to the tour that I do. So it's a good link to have.
And finally, why do you think every Agatha Christie fan should visit Dartmoor?
Well, Dartmoor is obviously, it's a place that was very close to Agatha's heart. It's where she finished compiling her first story, and it features in several of her books: The Sitterford Mystery, The Big Four, Evil Under the Sun. So it was a place that inspired her. Now, I do my regular Agatha Christie tour, and then that's around Torquay and includes Greenway, but often I'll do a second tour for avid guests, which can include Dartmoor, and we can also include the likes of Burr Island, another place that was obviously very close to Agatha's heart. So, and Dartmoor is so much. It's inspired so many people over the centuries even. Steven Spielberg filmed War Horse up there and referred to it as the most beautiful place he's ever filmed. So it has been the inspiration for many great people, and I think for my guests it's a wonderful place to spend time and to really, lose themselves amongst the history, the landscape, the nature, and the country inns, which are another great feature. And never mind mentioning the wonderful tea rooms where you can go and get fabulous Devonshire cream tea.
Thank you very much, Alex. Well, we're now at Jay's grave, which is not far from Haytor. And the weather, if anything, is getting worse. It's raining and very, very windy, but we're looking at the grave, which is this very moving little place. There's a gravestone with fresh flowers beside it. There are always fresh flowers there. Nobody really knows who puts them there, but today we've got foxgloves and sweet peas and even some gorse. But what's the legend around this place, Matt?
So the story goes there was a young servant girl called Kitty J, and the Lord of the Manor's son got her pregnant, but denied that the baby was his. She ended up committing suicide and was buried on a crossroads because it was believed that the devil couldn't take your soul if you're buried on the crossroads. So it's a really sad story, but you can see we're actually on a crossroads here, can't you?
Yeah, and it's one of many legends sort of on Dartmoor, really.
There's loads. There's pixies, there's ghosts, there's witches, there's spectral hounds, and even the devil himself.
And of course, rich inspiration for writers, including, of course, Agatha and Conan Doyle. And you've been speaking to Jamie about that appeal.
I'd say the two had slightly different approaches to myths and legends. So Dartmoor is just a really kind of fascinating place. It's some of the oldest human settlements in Britain were on Dartmoor, and it's got that communion with thousands of years actually of natural and human history. And so, of course, myths and legends and ghosts and spirits have all grown up around it, and people still talk about them now. You don't need to look very far to find the supernatural in Agatha Christie's work, especially her early work. Stories like The Hound of Death and The Last Seance, it's all there. But I'd say that whereas Arthur Conan Doyle was really fascinated by spiritualism and became himself a very committed spiritualist towards the end of his life, especially, Agatha Christie was a little more open-minded, and she would write stories that were perhaps supernatural in nature, but she'd also write quite logical stories that made use of the supernatural ideas and themes to explain how something could happen in a way that doesn't seem to make sense at first.
So talking of supernatural, their lives intertwined in a really fascinating way when she went missing in 1926.
They did. This is one of those stories that doesn't sound real, and sometimes it comes up in films or books about the experiences of 1926. And you think, oh, this is something the writers made up. But no, it's absolutely true. When she went missing, which was obviously a very difficult time, it caused a huge media storm. There was a lot of public interest in the case, and newspapers and police actually were asking other crime writers if they might have any insights on the case. So Edgar Wallace made some really unhelpful remarks in the Daily Mail, but the police also contacted Arthur Conan Doyle, which was not the first time he'd been brought in by the police to help solve a case. The idea of set a crime writer to catch a crime writer. By this point, he was a very, very committed spiritualist, and so he actually asked the police for an item belonging to Agatha Christie. And they didn't really know what he wanted it for. Maybe like Sherlock Holmes, he could detect something from an ink stain on the finger of a glove or something, but they gave him a glove and he took it to a medium and asked the medium where the owner could be found. Well, the medium just said something very general about finding them near water, and that was the end of that, really. No one thought much more about it. Interestingly, of course, she was found in the Harrogate Hydropathic Hotel, which is a hotel using water therapy. So perhaps there was something in it after all.
So you did a really interesting talk up at Dartmoor Prison at the Prison Museum, and you suggested that the Sitterford Mystery could have been a tribute to Conan Doyle.
I really believe that the Sitterford Mystery was written to honour Arthur Conan Doyle. It was published the year he died, but written probably before he died, or largely before he died, because he's mentioned in it as someone one of the characters writes a letter to or thinks about writing to. So I think it might have been kind of in honour of his 70th birthday or something. But yeah, I think the Dartmoor connection is very strong, but also the plot itself of Sitterford Mystery really resembles The Hound of the Baskervilles in a lot of different ways. There's the setting, there's a lot of myths and legends flying around, and of course, like we discussed, that prisoner from Dartmoor Prison on the run causing a bit of a red herring. So it's a completely different sort of story, and I don't think the plots could be any less alike, but even down to the very small characters, like there's a lonely nature enthusiast who's very interested in local folklore, who kind of appears as a smaller character in the Sitterford Mystery and resembles a much larger character in The Hound of the Baskervilles. So I think they were both drawing similar inspirations. And of course, Agatha read Arthur Conan Doyle extensively, and of course she would have read The Hound of the Baskervilles pretty extensively as well. So even if it wasn't a conscious thing, which I think it must have been, I'm sure this book was very much in her mind when she was writing.
So Dartmoor remains an inspiration for writers and poets and artists today. What do you think remains so alluring about this national park?
Bit of a mystery, really, but then again, mystery is part of the allure, for sure. It's not a place really like any other. It's an other place, if you like. It's endlessly vast in an increasingly small world. I know we're opening up a lot and we're seeing more of the world, but always in very small chunks. And I think that bigness of Dartmoor is a huge appeal. It's not just appealing to crime writers, it's inspired poets and all kinds of other writers and thinkers over the ages. But it's a place which is bigger than any fashion that's going on now. It's a place where you can kind of commune with hundreds of years at any one time. It's a place of danger, but also of possibility and mystery. Sylvia Plath wrote a poem called New Year on Dartmoor, and she talked in that about the blind, white, awful, inaccessible slant. There's no getting up it by the words you know. Now, that's a completely different take to the much more optimistic one that Agatha had on it. But I think that really shows how the place for Plath helped her express her alienation in the kind of world we might call normal. So I think what it does is it lets you go into communion with yourself a bit, away from all the distractions of whatever historical period, whatever fashions you're living through at the moment. And those kinds of places are getting rarer and rarer and rarer. So I think as long as it's preserved as a national park, it will continue to inspire writers and artists for a long time to come.
Thank you, Jamie. Well, we're now on our way to Princetown, and I'm feeling a little bit anxious about the journey because we're driving along the B3212, which is the main Transmoor road, which is known as the Hairy Hands Road.
So yeah, there's a legend about this road. So back in the 20th century there was an awful lot of accidents, and the story goes that a pair of hairy hands would grab your steering wheel, or if you're on a motorbike they might grab your handlebars and cause your vehicle to crash off the side of the road. And it wasn't just vehicle accidents as well. There was a woman caravanning up here with her husband, and in the middle of the night she saw a pair of hairy hands trying to open the caravan door, so she made the sign of the cross to scare the hands away.
Absolutely terrifying, and I'm really hoping that we don't have any hairy hands moments on our journey today. But for now it's time for our regular feature, What Christie Means to Me in 3, and today we're hearing from David Morris, who's the editor and author of the website Collecting Christie.
I was actually born in Exeter, Devon, heart of Agatha Christie country, and a part of the world I love to return to as often as I can. First and foremost, Agatha Christie to me is an author, someone whose books I can pull off the shelf to read, someone who I know will never let me down, will entertain me, will comfort me, and will transport me into worlds I enjoy spending time in, whether it's the world of Poirot, or Miss Marple, Harley Quinn, Parker Pine, Tommy and Tuppence. So many wonderful characters that she's created over the years. But beyond being a regular author, she's also a fantastic playwright, and I love seeing her productions on stage, whether it's grand productions like Witness for the Prosecution at County Hall or The Mousetrap, to the smaller regional productions that are often available to go to and enjoy plays like Black Coffee or Spider's Web. There's also the world of television and film adaptations that are just wonderful experiences, whether it's David Suchet playing Poirot, Peter Ustinov. So many great people have attempted to portray her characters over the years, and I'm always entertained when I see any of these adaptations. She's also provided something that I can enjoy with my wife. She loves reading Christie too, and so together we can read stories, talk about them, but she's also given us places to travel to. Death on the Nile inspired us to take a cruise down the Nile and visit many of the wonderful locations in Egypt featured in her novel. We also went to Jordan to visit Petra, inspired by Appointment with Death. She's also given me a hobby for so many years. I love collecting paperbacks, first editions, play scripts, and other forms of Christie-related material. And that hobby has turned into my Collecting Christie website, which I'm thrilled to share with so many people. And it has now allowed me to meet many other fans of Agatha Christie. So cumulatively, I would say that the reason I love Agatha Christie is because she has enriched my life in so many ways through all of these different aspects. Thank you for letting me share this with you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, David Morris. Well, we're now in Princetown, which is such an atmospheric town right in the middle of Dartmoor, totally overshadowed by the high granite walls of Dartmoor Prison. And Conan Doyle came here, stayed in the Duchy Hotel, which is now the visitor centre. And generally, this is a very kind of atmospheric, inspiring place for a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I used to come up here quite a bit as a youth. So there's a campsite very near here, and we used to camp up there at night, and you could look over the prison at night with all the lights, which was quite spooky. But one night we were sat around a campfire, and me and my friends were all telling ghost stories. Then out of the mist, this guy came walking with a dog, and he goes, "Oh, I see you boys are telling ghost stories. I can tell you a few." And he sat down and proceeded to absolutely terrify us. So yeah, it's a very atmospheric place. Agatha Christie featured it. So in her book, The Sitterford Mystery, one of the inmates, who's called Fremantle Freddy, escaped from the prison in the book.
I mean, interestingly, hot off the presses, as it were, all the prisoners have recently been moved out of Dartmoor because of the worry about radon gas. And I think there's speculation that it may never reopen as a prison, and who knows what will happen to that building in future. But as we've mentioned, Dartmoor has been so inspiring for writers. And there's a contemporary writer, Stephanie Austin, who is writing lots of novels, crime novels, based on Dartmoor. They include Dead on Dartmoor, The Dartmoor Murders, and Death Comes to Dartmoor. So we wanted to have a chat with her about her inspiration.
It's so rich. There's so much. I mean, people, if you say the word Dartmoor, most people tend to think of one type of landscape, you know, the rocky tors, the wide open vistas where nothing's growing any higher than perhaps a stunted thorn tree. If they've read their Conan Doyle, they may well think of the mires and the bogs and so on. And it's true that that kind of landscape is there, and you only need to put a foot wrong in that kind of landscape and you're in trouble. And that's one of the appeals, I'm sure, for crime writers about Dartmoor. You know, the weather only needs to change, or you put your foot on the wrong off the path and you can easily be in trouble. So apart from the fact that the landscape offers you tremendous descriptive opportunities, you know, it's a place where you can, you know, even today in our modern day setting with our mobile phones and everything, you can still get into trouble up there. The other thing is it's immensely wealthy in the type of landscape it offers you, because as well as this sort of traditional view of Dartmoor, there are so many valleys that are very lush with beautiful trees and forests. We have pockets of primeval rainforest left, and all of these have a different setting and a different atmosphere. So you have that great wealth of different kinds of location available to you. And also, almost every town or village or hamlet that you visit on Dartmoor either has a fascinating history or it has some kind of myth or legend attached to it. So there are wonderful ways to draw the reader in and create a real sense of place. It's not just another muddy field or another little house with a church and a pub, another little village with a church and a pub. So there's a tremendous wealth and depth to the landscape that allows you to be very specific about it and you know, create real atmosphere.
Your work obviously comes in a great tradition of crime writing set on Dartmoor, and talking about Agatha Christie in particular, how do you feel your work in a way sort of builds on that tradition?
Well, it does. I mean, I think if you look at The Mysterious Affair at Styles, which is her first book, and you think of her actually writing that in the Moorland Hotel up on near Haytor, and think about the isolation, I think is very key to some of her writing. I think she felt quite isolated within herself at times in her life, and I think that comes across with some of these very isolated settings. And if you think even more that she probably was writing by gaslight, because you know, electricity didn't come to Widdicombe until 1962, so I doubt the Moorland Hotel had it back in the 1920s. We're all building on that kind of feeling of mystery in a kind of alien setting. And obviously, the modern-day crime writer owes a tremendous amount to that detective tradition, that golden age of detection, and Agatha herself. And I think she was one of the very first writers really to invest her characters with any real psychological depth. I think up to then you can look at a lot of crime writing which was very much focused around solving the mystery, solving the puzzle. The plot came first. And I think Agatha gives us a depth of psychological insight that we don't find in a lot of those books. The problem for the modern day crime writer is that, yes, we bathe in Agatha's sunshine, but we also mope in her shadow. Everybody who comes down here, people come from all over the world to learn about Agatha. And yet, if you're a modern day crime writer and you're trying to promote some interest in your own work by putting on a festival, as we do every year in Torquay at the museum, it can be difficult to get, for people to be interested in other writers. So yes, it's great. We owe her a lot, but at the same time, we struggled sometimes to get out from underneath her skirts, if you know what I mean.
It's an odd sort of position, isn't it? Because in a way, she kind of paved the way for people like you.
Absolutely.
But yet she still dominates.
And yet she still dominates, yes. I mean, when you think about the festival and how many people are coming from, how many countries was it? 25 countries or something? I mean, that's astonishing, isn't it? To think that she can still pull like that. She still is this tremendous draw. And that's quite a hard act to follow, isn't it? Yeah, impossible, in fact.
But saying all that, your books are very successful. And is that partly because they're about Dartmoor and people are just fascinated by Dartmoor?
I think so. And anyone who comes here on holiday obviously loves to read about where they're staying and so on. Yes, I mean, I think, if you think about Agatha and you also think about perhaps back to Conan Doyle and the Hound of the Baskervilles, which everybody knows about, whether they've read the book or whether they haven't, they all know about that. So I think everybody comes with this idea that this place is full of mystery and magic and, really strange things can go on here. And I think that's part of the fascination, that yes, I mean, it is a real place and, as I say, it's very easy to get lost or get into danger up there. But a lot of this sort of idea of what Dartmoor is like in the popular imagination comes through Conan Doyle and comes through Agatha Christie.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Now, continuing our tour of the moor in this rather inclement weather, we've now come to Sheep's Tor. And this is a very famous tour on Dartmoor. It's quite close to Plymouth, so a lot of Plymouth people come and spend time here. And it's a very grand, imposing tour with great flying buttresses of rock. But it's very famous for its Pixie's Cave. And this also featured in Agatha's work.
Yeah, so in the book Evil Under the Sun, Poirot arranges a picnic and they come up to go and visit Pixie's Cave. We can't get up to it today because it's really wet and slippery and you've got to basically clamber up some quite wet rocks, haven't you? But there's some brilliant legends associated with the cave.
And it's been a tourist attraction for many years. And it's said that if you crawl into it, you can hear the little folk and see them at work and play even, which is quite a thought.
It's quite terrifying, to be quite honest.
I mean, this has been written up over the years. So, for example, in 1873, in the Folklore of Devonshire, R.J. King wrote the following: "They pound their cider and grind their corn, and the hum of the talk and the sound of their work may be heard by all that enter their house among the granite masses of Sheep's Tor. On Sundays, the faint chimes of their church bells is audible, for the pixies are great bell ringers."
And apparently if you visit the cave, you're supposed to leave a gift. And if you don't, in the middle of the night, they might come and pinch you. And talking about pinching things, there's also a legend that you can hear babies crying in there. And there's a legend that pixies can come into your house, steal real babies and replace them with pixie babies. And the real babies are in the cave. That's even more sinister, isn't it?
The moral of the story is don't mess with the pixies.
I don't think we should ever go and visit this cave, should we?
And again, the cave features in the Sitterford Mystery, which we've already mentioned a few times.
Yeah, so we talked about a prisoner escaping, Fremantle Freddy, and in the story there's a presumption he might have gotten hidden in the cave.
Well, he took his chances with the pixies, obviously.
Well, we're coming to the end of the episode and we've been forced to take refuge in the Warren House Inn, which is on the Hairy Hands Road and has a legend that the fire never goes out. And we've had to come in here because the weather's turned truly biblical outside. So our plan was to finish the episode with a picnic because Agatha loved picnics on Dartmoor. In fact, she came here with her family for her 80th birthday and there was a big family gathering, and I tried to find out where that was. So I spoke to Matthew Pritchard, who's Agatha's grandson, and I said, could you remember where that was? And he said, I think it was near Haytor, and it was by a small stream. And he sent us a photograph, and we think we may have worked out where it could have been.
Yeah, I think it was probably a lovely little stream called the Becker Brook, which is not far from Haytor and has lovely trees and is very pretty, and it would indeed be the perfect place for a picnic. So I think that's probably where it was.
So we've had to abandon that idea, and we've come into the pub, and the good news is, Sophie, it's your round.
Funny how it always seems to be my round. This podcast was recorded on location in Devon, England in July 2024 and is brought to you by the Agatha Christie Festival. It was funded by Torbay's Local Heritage Grant Scheme. This is a collaboration between Torbay Council, Torbay Culture and the English Riviera UNESCO Global Geopark, with investment from the National Lottery Heritage Fund.
Thanks to our guests, Jamie Bernthal Hooker, Alex Graham, Stephanie Austin and David Morris. Original music and design by Rob Hoskins at Design by Hoskins. Join us at the Agatha Christie Festival every September on the English Riviera. Visit www.agathachristiefestival.com.